One of the most polarizing figures in CSGO esports is without a doubt lurppis, this Finnish commentator and analyst and journalist who works for HLTV.org. You might have seen him doing commentary and analysis for DreamHack events, particularly going back, he did the first major, DreamHack Winter. He's worked events like he did DreamHack Summer on the analysis desk and doing commentary as well. And a lot of people don't like him, or they get riled up by his comments, or they feel like the way he comes across is like, they think he's unprofessional, or he hates certain players, and so he's very divisive, very kind of polarizing figure where he draws a lot of attention. But to really understand who he is as a person, you have to kind of understand his career as a player, then leading into his analysis era and leading into CSGO, because he hasn't competed in CSGO. It was 1.6 where he was a player for the majority of the time. So I've known him for many, many years. I've been a friend of his for a long time. I followed his whole career. I followed the Finnish scene quite closely because I had friends within that scene. So I'll kind of tell you the story of that. So first things first, here's what's interesting. You'll know him now as a journalist after his playing career. But actually the first place he had any notoriety at all was as a journalist. So in the early days, we're talking like 2003, when he was very young. He was like 15, I think he might have been like 15 years old at the time. He was doing very, very simple online interviews, and he was working for Gotfrag, which is the biggest CS site at the time. And his English wasn't particularly good, but he had a very low level. Actually, kind of the typical level of Finnish people who haven't had a lot of exposure to Western culture. They've only learned a bit of English in school, and maybe they've talked a little bit in online games, but they haven't really attempted to speak the language a lot, and they haven't spoken a lot to native speakers. So very basic English, does a few interviews, wasn't by any means some great journalist or whatever, but that's the first place he pops up. And then within Finland, he's playing at LANs, local LANs, small LANs. He's playing with some good players, but he's not a known player. He's not a top player at the time. And around 2005, this is where the story really starts, because he's in this team called Wings. And the thing about Wings is, it's a team that he created, and it's made up. It's almost like a family team, because the core components, four of the players in four out of the five, have some direct connection, not to each other, but to other people within the team. So there's lurppis and his brother Nasu, his younger brother, probably the top, I'd say the second best Finnish player ever produced in the scene, a very good player. So there's his younger brother, lurppis, and his younger brother Nasu, and there's another set of brothers who aren't related to them, which is Barak and Shiri, and they're brothers. And then the fifth player is Kupi, who was a friend of lurppis's. And this is the thing about the team is, yeah, they have two pairs of brothers in it, but it's a friends team, and it's a team that gets along well, and they have a good synergy, and they have a good setup of players as well. Like in this team, what's interesting is, they didn't really have in-game leading and strats to the same degree you think of in the latter days. Really, lurppis was more just a player, really. He was more like a third star, like a hybrid support fragger. Nasu was like the main star fragger. I'd say that Kopi was like maybe second star. And then the others, like Barak was a bit of an onliner, so I can't really put him as a proper star. But okay, it was generally a mixed fragging team. It wasn't one with such set roles in that sense. They first broke out when they went to Barcelona, CPL Barcelona. There's a CPL stop in Barcelona, European CPL, and they managed to upset Team 3D, the team with Moto, Rambo, those amazing players from N8, who were in a bit of a slump at the time. They managed to upset this team. They beat them. They didn't place particularly well at the event. Beyond that, they didn't get any top placing at the event. But okay, they got one big upset. Like, wow, what a great game. Later in the year, they go to the European qualifier for this big tournament called WEG, World Esports Games, which took place in Korea, and the idea was a lot of top teams wanted to go there, and you stayed there for like a few weeks, and you would play different games each week on television in Korea, and you try and qualify for the big final where you could win like 50 grand for first place. Amazingly, this Wings team at the European qualifier managed to win the qualifier. A qualifier with a lot of great teams there, players like Khan, and obviously there was guys like NOA with Executor. You had a whole bunch of teams at this event. And they actually managed to shock the whole event and win it. Now, the WEG actual tournament again, much like it with the upset before, they actually didn't really deliver on it. Like, actually, at that tournament, yeah, they weren't able to do anything significant. They weren't able to make a top placing. But the seeds were there. There was something going on here. So one thing I have one upset, but there was like a couple of upsets combined. And it's clear that there was something going on there. Like, you could already see that, okay, Nasu was already a pretty good player, pretty well-rounded. Kupi had some skills. Like, there was something to this team. And lurppis was a decent player at the time, actually. Going into 2006, it was around the middle of 2006 that this team that they had was really able to kind of take off. Now, what happened was they had a big roster change where they took out Barak, they took out Shiri, they took out, let me think, yeah, Kopi went out as well. So there was just lurppis and there was just Nasu left. And the players they brought in Ruit, who ended up being the best Finnish player of all time, very aggressive player, early entry fragger, non-stop pushing aggro type player. They brought in Conte, who's a very passive player, a late round lurker, get right nowadays in this parlance type player. And then they had Tonpa, who was kind of their support player, who would just do whatever was needed in the team. And so it put Nasu now into sort of a third star, second star sort of category, depending on how you want to weigh up him and Conte. But overall, not the main star. Root's the overall carry now. And this team very quickly becomes pretty good. What's funny is in the middle of the summer, they actually had this weird slump where they were going to these smaller events and not doing very well, and coming third, fourth with like not very good teams. But then they start going to the big events, and they have these 3 results in a row where they're placing top 3 at events with top level teams at them. So at Code 5, they finished top 3. This was the event won by NIP when they had Zet and Roban, all those guys. I think Spawn was in that team at the lineup at the time. Then they went to WSVG London Stop, which was the one that was won by the Poles. It was the first decent-sized event won by Neo and Taz in terms of like international competition. And this Finnish team of lurppis, now called Hurai, manages to place ahead of SK Gaming. Then they go to the World Cyber Games and they win the bronze medal. And here's the thing, even though they won the bronze there, that was an event where really, that's one of the most brutal losses of Lurppis' career in that teams, because they played NIP, who finished second, really close in the semi-final, and they were very close to getting into the final and at least getting a silver medal. But instead, they had to settle for the bronze overall. Now, the CPL that year, unfortunately, they played poorly because the thing was, Nasu, Lurppis' brother, who was a skilled player, was only 16, and you had to be 17 to compete in CPL events. So American CPL events were going to be off limits for a time. What's interesting is 2007 begins with actually such turmoil in the top level of the scene because of roster moves elsewhere that Lurppis' team, which has now done one roster move themselves, they brought in Natu, this legendary old school player, but now he's on the back end of his career. It's funny because he still plays now, plays in 3D Max, but he'd gone from being like sort of a second or third best player in teams, of being a good European top player, to now he's just like an okay player. But within this team, they don't need star power. They just need people to do their job, and he's replacing Tonpa. So again, he just takes up the kind of role of the guy who's the support player, and he's kind of somebody who can work with Lurppis and calm people's attitudes down, all this sort of stuff. They bring him in, and because of Fnatic losing Tentpole, who's a very skilled player, and having to bring in Inns and work him into the lineup, because of the NIP team that had been really good in 2006, fracturing and going away, some of them going to SK, some of them going, Zet going to America and playing in CGS. Because of NOA changing some of their players, you got in this position where there was no clear top team. And so what happened is the Finns were kind of like opportunists here. They managed to win the NGL 1 Season 2 tournament. They beat all these top teams there, Fnatic included. They managed to win WSVG LAN War in America, where they were ahead of SK, Mouse Sports, these teams. And overall, they were, for this short period of time, so 2 or 3 months, they were the top team. Now, as the year went on, okay, the other teams got better. Like the Poles won 2 majors. Fnatic became this dominant streak team that had all these great placings towards the end of the year. They still managed to be a solid team, though. They managed to place third at IEM Season 2 Los Angeles, losing a very close game to SK. I think it was overtime on Train. Overall, still a very competitive team. So actually, they're back kind of down to overall in terms of placing as to where they were at the end of 2006. Because that was what I mean. They were always around the 3rd or 4th level at that period of time. It's just opportunity that allowed them to have that brief period at number 1. Now, going into 2008, they had this crazy NGL 1 final where they go there again, where they'd won the previous year, the Season 4 final. This time, they have these 2 best-of-3s with Fnatic where they narrowly lose. And so as a result, they come second in this one. After that, things go to shit. The results go badly. Lurppis actually gets kicked, but what's interesting is he gets kicked because the way that team worked, they wouldn't practice more. They wouldn't put more effort into tactics and stuff like that. There wasn't really any proper players that they could recruit that would be obvious upgrades. And so the style of the team back then, and it mainly came from this guy Conte, was they would just, as the months went by, and you'd see this after Lurppis, they would just sort of cut one person and then think about maybe get someone else. And then later on, they'd think about cutting someone else. And everyone except Conte at some point either got cut or was thought about being cut. And so it was kind of a vicious cycle and kind of a dysfunctional family affair, that, especially since people would come back. Since it was still the best team and there weren't options for the guys who got cut either. So it was really kind of a fucked up scenario of like a musical chairs almost within the Finnish scene. So in 2008, when he got cut, the team went with, well, listen, it was a good player in terms of individual players. They just replaced him with the Orpa T-Hop. They took all the same strats. They played all these tournaments, and they had some tournaments where they upset great teams, and they finished top 3 or top 4. But overall, they never won an event. They never did better than they did when they had Lurppis. And after the year, it was kind of a waste. They'd gone all these tournaments, and they kind of realised, what a waste of time. So they kicked out... Who did they kick at that point in time? Let me think. I mean, they'd already kicked out Natu in 2007 at some point when they'd had their failures. Let me think who it would have been who they kicked. I assume would be T-Hop again. So in 2009, briefly lurppis returned and they played the 2 IEM events, and they did okay at the European one. They did quite poorly at the global one, and at the time they'd lost their sponsorship, and there was a whole thing of like, what's going to happen here? And out of nowhere, lurppis gets the opportunity, an offer to go to North America, play for Evil Geniuses, who had a lot of money at the time, get a good salary, and he's going to be this one European, this in-game leader, and that's what North America lacks. And he's going to lead this team that's made up of nothing, who's like the young star on the rise, who over the last couple of years has been rising up in level, but has never quite cracked being a true international star. And then a team made up of players who were the old complexity lineup, basically, like Storm, Warden, Fraud. And Fraud obviously used to be a great player, but they'd just been playing CGS. They'd only just come back to 1.6. So actually, they were quite rusty. They were kind of crap compared to the level of stars and what we thought of them before. They were getting back into the game. Now, lurppis has this role of being imported as this in-game leading talent, which North America didn't really have like proper in-game leaders to the same degree Europe did. He's able to make quite a big impact on this team, because that year, yeah, they were able to win a SEA LAN. They did get upset at one of them. They were able to win this Game Gun Mexico event where they beat We Made Fox, the Koreans, which was an impressive result. They were able to play a bunch of the top European teams close. Like they went to IEM Chengdu in China, and they only finished in the round of 8 there, but they lost to SK, who won the event, and they had one map that was really close. Arbalete Europe, towards the end of the year, they were able to finish in 3rd place there, and they'd actually gotten to the winners bracket final, and then they just lost the 2 maps. It was best of 1 double elimination, which is like the worst way to come 3rd place, because you think you can finish top 2 or first, and then you just lose 2 games and go out. And both were close games. I think they were both on Dust 2 against SK Gaming, who had Crystal and Face and all those guys, and then MTW, who had Trace at this point in time. So kind of a disappointing result, and the way that result fell apart there, and the way the one in China against SK, where they'd had like a train game that had gone really close in overtime, they'd lost. The way these 2 results happened kind of set the stage for where EG and lurppis' teams would be, and also the problems they'd face, because they could always play the best European teams close on like one map, or they could get an upset win at some point earlier in the tournament, but then late in the tournament, they'd kind of fade and fall, and they'd always lose when it was like the 14-14 round, or they'd lose after they'd won a map and then the second one wasn't, or they'd win a map and tie a map, then the 3rd map they'd lose. Whatever happened, the end of the tournament would always be when they'd fall away, and that's why they weren't a championship caliber team. So going into 2010, they come in at that status of like having been 3rd. They managed to impress everyone. They finish, I think they finished 1st in the group at the IEM World Championship, so they get to the semi-finals. In the semi-finals, they had to face Na'Vi, and this is the first massive event where Na'Vi went crazy and they won the whole World Championship. So they lost out there. Then in the 3rd place game, they had to place SK, who just got Gux from Fnatic, and SK beat them, so they finished 4th. So again, they've done this really good little run in the easier part of the tournament. Admittedly, they were good in best of ones. Then they've lost the 2 series, this time 2 series instead of 2 best of ones, and they've gone out in the worst place you can do from that point, which is 4th place. And again, there's all the stories of like, oh, but what if, and oh, if only this, and if we could have played like that. It's kind of the same thing going to repeat. So they go home, they win the ESEA tournaments. Arbalete Cup Dallas comes around the middle of the year, summer. They manage to finish 3rd place here. Again, they have to face Na'Vi in the semi-final. Again, I think this time they won a map as well, did they? Let me think. Yeah, I think they won the 1st map, and they just got utterly bodied on the next 2, which was like, okay. And then in the 3rd place game, they beat H2K, which is like Exist and those guys. So again, another top placing, but again, even with the positives, you can't convert on it. Something's failing, and there's all the what ifs. Towards the end of that year, they had one really good result, which is they went to MSI Beat It Finals, the same sort of tournament that was running in CSGO in 2013. And they play there, and they managed to beat Khan's Fnatic in the final. That had Get Right, it had Gux, it had Forest, these great players. They managed to beat them in a best of 3, so they have this one really big result, but it's at a smaller event. And it's kind of reminiscent of when they'd beaten Fnatic back in the day at NGL 1 Season 2. Yeah, great result. Win over a top-level team, one of the best in the whole world, but it's not like winning an IEM. It's not like winning a WCG. It's not like winning even like a DreamHack. Well, actually, at that point, DreamHack wasn't good. But in the modern consideration of DreamHack as like a top tier 2 tournament, when it was like DreamHack Summer or something in CSGO, it's not even really as big as that. It's a good tournament stack, but it's a smaller one still. So they managed to win that. Then they went to, what was after that? I think World Elite Masters was after that, which was like the Chinese modern version of the WEG, but now is in China. And at this tournament, they managed to upset the Fnatic team. Again, they beat them on Dust 2 in this overtime game. Famously, the one that Khan will never let any of us forget, with his salt pouring out for the fact that lurppis won this key 1v1 against Forest, where it was later shown that it seems like Fraud actually ghosted, even though lurppis apparently didn't hear him. So Khan will never let that one die, and that actually helped to knock Fnatic out in last place. Shout outs to Khan there, last place in Big International Tournament. But after that, they couldn't really do anything, e.g. they didn't place very well at that tournament, but that was a worthwhile result, and plus I like to just throw that in there for Khan. They won another ESEA title. He was racking up ESEA titles in NA. Now here's the problem at this point in time. This is when they made the decision around this time to remove, I think it was just before WM actually they did this. They removed Good For Nothing. Was that after actually? That might have been after. They removed Good For Nothing, like he had to step down. They brought in D-Born, who was like a young fragger guy, but he hadn't really proven it internationally necessarily. This point, the team's results kind of like, yeah, you could tell that there was going to be issues, and lurppis was actually kicked from the team again. What's funny is every time he was kicked, it was never because he was the worst player. It was never because he was a bad in-game leader. It was always due to like drama within the team, where two other people within the team who didn't like his opinion or what he thought of them and their problems would just ally and go, let's just kick him instead. And so they'd kick him. And also, crucially, it would never solve the team's problems. They'd have the same problems, if not worse, and they probably would have been better off keeping him. Going into 2011, now he has a brief period where he's retired. He actually did some commentating for the IEM World Championship, the one that Na'Vi did run. It was their back-to-back title. Then he came back. He made his Finnish team again. He got his brother back, Nasu. He had, who else was in this team? Oh, yeah, Plaste back. Actually, that's right. I've forgotten. Plaste was the player who was in that team instead of T-Hop, I think, way back before. Maybe it was Plaste they kicked way back when they brought him in. He had Plaste, but Plaste was maybe like the third best player Finland had ever produced, or fourth, around that level. But the problem is his level had really dropped off. He became this like poker star, and he wasn't that good anymore. They had some new school players. So they had Aslak, this AWPer, but he had kind of like performance anxiety issues. They had Alu, who we all know now is like a really skilled player, but he's mainly played online. He hasn't ever been like a really beast team, but they had Alu. He was like a fresh ace at this time, along with Aslak. And they went to this LAN. It was WEG. We're back in Korea. It's WEG E-Stars. And the big result here was they were able to beat Fnatic, which was Khan, DSN. But this time, they hadn't. They still had like Exist, Peter. They hadn't gotten like, they'd lost Forrest and Get Right at the end of 2010, and this was like a down moment for them, but lurppis was able to again upset them and knock them out early, but again also didn't get like a sick performance. Like didn't finish top 8, top 4 or anything. But it's interesting that Khan and lurppis always had this rivalry, because Khan was on the way better teams that accomplished way more, much greater player, but lurppis always had teams that upset them or had some good moments at a certain time. So we've had a lot of fun with that behind the scenes, don't worry. So after that, his teams had a nice little run where they finished like top 3 at IEM China, where admittedly there weren't any elite level teams there. It was just Fnatic and Mouse Sports. They went to the Samsung Esports Championship, which was kind of like a it was the World Cyber Games for Europe only. And at this event, you remember the storyline before? They played Na'Vi at this event in a semi-final. They do quite well. I think they win a map here, and then they lose to... They go out the tournament in unconvincing fashion, and again, it's a third place, but you don't finish top 2. Like, same story as it always was. They go to IEM New York and finish second to the SK Gaming team, who was one of the top 3 elite teams in the world, who themselves didn't lose to teams like lurppis in this time, so they didn't lose there either. ESWC was just a round of 8 finish, because again, they had to play Na'Vi, and Na'Vi were beasts at the time, so yeah, tough situation to be in. That's a problem with lurppis' teams as well. Because of his style of leadership, which I think I'll go into in a minute, they just weren't suited to, like, in best of 3s, beat the elite level teams, the teams that were better than them, basically. They could beat the teams below them, but the part of his in-game leadership style was why they couldn't beat those teams. Now, just to finish the story up, in 2012, they went to the 2 IEM events. They didn't do well, for like top 6, top 8. The IEM World Championship one, they actually would have gone through on like round difference or something, but some crazy scenario happened that like just fucked him over in the last game. That was kind of disappointing. And then he basically retired. Like he came back for 1 ESEA that he won. So overall, he'd won like 5 ESEA titles. He had a whole gang of like, I mean, what are we thinking here? If we went up this list, it'd be like what, 5 or 6 or 7 top 3s at big international tournaments, big European tournaments. So a pretty solid career, but not on the level of the elite level in-game leaders like the Ave, Zeus, God B, Khan. But listen, approaching that sort of level for a player who in general was working with less talent, less opportunity, less good teams, etc., and had some good, very respectable results. So a tier 2 level all-time in-game leader, if we want to talk like that. Now, as an in-game leader, what's interesting is lurppis didn't start out really as an in-game leader. He kind of adopted it later, and then he was quite serious about it. The thing with his style was it was a very default kind of style. Like, I would compare him in the modern day. If you want to hear an analogy for CSGO, lurppis was kind of like Sean Gares, the in-game leader. the in-game leader of Complexity. Remember when in Complexity were really good? At the end of 2013, the first half of 2014, when they were all able to make top 8 of all these majors. I mean, they made top 4 the first one, but admittedly, it wasn't quite as compact. It wasn't quite as competitive on their side of the bracket. But they were able to make it top 4, top 8, top 8. At this period of time, part of the reason why they were good in that sense was that Sean Gares, whereas a lot of the NA players, they always just played this pick style on Terra's side, or they tried to just like get a kill and trade for that kill. Sean Gares would actually try and like scout and then run real strats. Lurppis was like that. He wasn't some like godly, he wasn't like the existence level or later on Pronax or maybe even exist, like just approaching that level. But he was sort of like a competent player where if you put him in with other good players, he's going to get the best out of them. He's going to make them into a team, a cohesive unit that they can accomplish more than the sum of their parts, if you want to use that old cliched hackneyed phrase. But that's what the team could be. It could be more than the sum of its parts. And you could fit a lot of different players with him, just like Complexity and Cloud9 were able to do this. And they would find a way to make it work and get the same coherent identity as a team. And so that was his overall style. Now, the problem is the strength of that is going to make you consistent. It's going to make you win against the right kind of opponents. It's going to make you beat lesser opponents. You're going to know what your strong map is. You're going to know what your strengths are. You're going to play to them. The problem comes if you run out default style of strats like that against elite level teams. You essentially need elite level teams to make huge mistakes for you to have a chance to win. And for you to actually win, you need them to make huge mistakes and some of your players to overperform. So occasionally that happened and he got these upsets. But if both teams just played at the normal level performance-wise that they should, and then as teams just executed like you'd expect them to consistently, and elite level teams tend to be the most consistent ones in general, then they'll be up here, the elite level team, and Lurppis' team will be down here, and he's not going to be able to go over them. They're just going to both play it out, and then they're going to win by a small margin, a decent margin, over 2 maps to 1, whatever the situation is. And Lurppis wasn't going to win. He wasn't the guy who would just kind of like decide, like, okay, I'm going to do some totally crazy anti-strats here that are totally off the wall and really risky, and so he wouldn't get the big upset. He also wasn't just going to go free-for-all style totally and have no strats. He would always do the same style. Another problem he sometimes had in his in-game leader, and this came from his personality, which I'll allude to as well, was that if things weren't working... Okay, here's the thing. Lurppis was the in-game leader who had this flaw. He would sometimes know what the right strat was to beat this team. And sometimes it's a strat that, in practice or in lesser games, his team could have executed. But in this game, against this team, they either can't execute it at this moment or they wouldn't overall be able to execute it well enough to actually make it work. And Lurppis couldn't always make the jump there from, I know what the perfect strat is, to I know what the perfect strat for us right now to try to give us the perfect chance would be. He didn't always make that connection properly. Sometimes he would be close, and this is a very difficult thing to make. This is like an all-time great in-game leader type ability to know that, by the way. That's something like very few do. Like, okay, the only people maybe better than him was like Ave, Zeus, maybe God B, these sorts of people. It's very hard to have that skill. You have to be one of the best ever to have that skill there. So that was an area where sometimes he would fall down a bit. And in the same sense, he would also sometimes give up a bit. Like if his team, he would call those certain strats that might have been sort of the right strats, and either this player's choking, like some of them did, or they're not executing the strat properly, or they're playing a little bit passive beyond the kind of aggressive way they normally play. There's a degree to which he would sort of be like, it's not like he'd give up outright, like, oh, it's over. But he just sort of, you could sense that he got frustrated and he didn't know how to express it and didn't know what to say to the team to change things up. And he would just play it out. And it's that thing of like, if you play it out the same way over and over, and you did this before and it didn't get results, it's not going to do this time. You play it out again and fuck, it didn't work again. And there would be this frustration there. But because he also didn't have a lot of options on who to replace in his team and what can he do here and what can he even change, because a lot of his teams wouldn't practice more or they had personality issues often, the frustration made sense because what's he supposed to do? So actually, unfortunately, he had to sort of resign himself to being like, well, I did the best I could. That was an okay result. We got an upset here. He couldn't really be the guy who was like living or dying over like, oh, we had to get top 2 there and I'd do everything and oh my God, and this went wrong and getting massive blow-ups. In general, he tended to just be a little bit passive-aggressive, but he'd just leave it at that. And that's the thing. In general, as a player, because of the talents he had and the situations he was in, a lot of the time also he couldn't have like maximum control. He couldn't be like an Ave or a Zeus or modern day existence and have total control over people and tell them you do exactly that. Instead, he had to kind of be a little like halfway between set strats and the exist loose Khan style, where you kind of let stars do what they want. So he'd get his stars, he'd let Ruit do what he wanted to a degree, wouldn't really rein him in much. He'd let Conte bait everyone if he wanted to, wouldn't rein him much. Nasu, okay, he's his brother, he's on the similar page, at least he'll do some of the things he wants. When he had players like Tompa and Natu, they'll do what they want. Players like Plaste Aslak, they're kind of between stars and kind of some people who sometimes have problems. You just kind of hope that they did well. in general, he'd put the pieces out there, let them kind of be a little bit autonomous within his system, and then he'd just see what the results were. He'd just hope they were good. And sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't so good. In general, he wasn't very good at taking his stars and either convincing them to do other things or steering them in different directions. He kind of just lived and died by his stars pressing mouse 1 and either killing people or not killing. There was a degree to which his career was at the whim of that sort of problem. Now, if he'd have had the best players in the world, if he'd have had Forrest, if he'd have had Kogu, if he'd have had Real, listen, maybe that even would have worked and they would have won events. He didn't quite have that caliber of play. He had some very elite level players at certain times, but yeah, not necessarily players the ones who could win a game for themselves didn't always do it, for the whole team rather, didn't always do it when he needed them to, if you're going to go with that style, you know. Part of this was, yeah, he was a bit passive-aggressive the way he expressed himself in-game. Now, what's funny is outside of the game, people won't believe this now because he seems like a combative, kind of aggressive person as he's grown up and he knows who he is. But lurppis was a very social, very well-liked player amongst all the scene. Because at the time, first of all, a lot of teams from different countries didn't really speak great English as their second language. A lot of them from different countries, quite poor English overall. Like the guys, Neo and Taz and those guys, they didn't have the greatest English until years went on, especially some of the other players in their team. Some of them didn't even speak, like Lord would almost never speak English. You had Navi, only a couple of them did. The Swedish players obviously had a way better. In general, the Scandinavians had the better level. Some of the Germans didn't like to speak English much. Among these player teams, you'd always have like 1 or 2 players who would at least try and they'd embrace it and their English got a lot better. So you think Taz, Khan, I mean, the accent never got better, but the English level got better. We had Zonic, to a degree, Ave. Who else do you have? Valet, Roban. Who else could we put into this mix? I guess Markov tried. He didn't have the greatest things, but at least he tried. You had players from all the top teams who would try. Lurppis was the guy for his team. Especially in his team, the Finns were very shy about speaking English. They didn't like to do it in general, and they weren't very social. He was the really social guy, and that's what set him apart, actually. He was not only super social, but as a result, his English got super good. And by the time he went to America, he had by far the best English, I think, of any European where English isn't their native language. So actually, he was very unique in that sense, and that's what allowed him to become friends and get to know everyone on all the teams, which has suited him well for the latter days now, where he, as a caster, etc., now he has a lot of background insight on a lot of who these people are that a normal caster wouldn't get in the way they interact with them, and a player also maybe wouldn't have if they were locked within their team and their scene and their area and the people they're friends with or rivals against they don't talk to. He actually had a lot of that like going for him in that sense. He was also someone who's quite open-minded to other cultures, and so I think this helped in terms of tactics. And he's also someone where in the end of 1.6, a lot of teams only watch demos, and they'd watch 3 demos of this next team to anti-strat them just on those demos. Lurppis, because he came from the world of being a journalist before he was, when he was just a kid, he was also a kind of a fan of players. He would watch games of Zet and games of Forest and games of Real and Kogu just to enjoy them as he does now when he's like an analyst, etc. Enjoying like Kenny S going crazy and Forest and Get Right playing godlike and Dosia having good rounds in CSGO. This is, I'm giving CSGO references here. He would kind of enjoy it in the same way a fan could, but also kind of a cultured way. So he was actually always set up in that sense to be an analyst. He was kind of becoming a kind of an analyst, developing those views. Because I used to talk to him a lot. We used to throw theories back and forwards. He used to kind of be developing that even while he was still a player, before he became a commentator, actually. And that's why in CSGO, early on in CSGO, it was Khan's idea over at Fnatic, on Fnatic TV, to do podcast. And it brought us all together because behind the scenes, me and Lurppis were friends. We used to battle back and forwards with Khan and argue with him and barb at him online, and we just got the 3 of us together. We actually became quite good friends as a threesome at the time by doing the podcast together. It was a way to get into CSGO because none of us was super into it at the beginning. It's quite a fucking bad game, to be fair, when it launched, and the scene was pretty shit with small lands. Like, first place was $5,000 and Nip was just wrecking everyone's heads. Like, it's like they were the only ones who could aim, and everyone else was like, how do you play this game? Like, no one had a clue what was going on. So it wasn't that appealing a game or even a scene at the time. But doing this show and having a reason to watch the tournament, to talk about it next week, got us into it, and Lurppis got into it. And interestingly, here's a little story for you. Early on in CSGO, he was really enthusiastic about it. Before CSGO launched, he'd said, like, listen, I love competition, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to play it and I'm going to compete no matter what the problems with the game are. And I was the one who used to say, like, yeah, to be fair, I think it has no chance of being as good as 1.6. Like, I've seen aspects of it, and I've seen who's involved in making it, and I've seen the way they're presenting it, and I can't see how it can possibly be as good. And it's probably going to be bad in these areas. It's going to be bad in terms of the attention from Valve, because we know the history of CS, where CS 1.6 was like their red-headed stepchild that they kept locked in the fucking attic and threw a barrel of fish, a bucket of fish heads up every now and then, but they had, like, CS sauce all the time. Like, you're my favourite son. Yes. Tournaments should use you, even though every fucking person in the world wanted to do CS 1.6 in general. Now, he was what's interesting, he was really into CSGO at the beginning, thinking, naively thinking, we can change this. Like, we can talk to Valve, tell them what's wrong, they'll make the game better. And interestingly, Valve burned him at the time. Like, he helped them out he tried to submit all this feedback, tried to get players to go into their special forum and post topics and have discussions. And basically, Valve weren't paying any attention, and they weren't implementing anything, and they weren't even having discussions, they weren't listening to the feedback, even though pro players were making it. And so what lurppis did was, he did some interviews where he said essentially like, well, he kind of gave up, like, well, Valve clearly doesn't care, isn't listening, this is a waste of our time. And that's where, at the first point I ever saw people start to get really mad at lurppis and start to hate on him. Because before that, he was actually pretty popular as a caster, and he was fairly popular as a player, and he'd done lots of interviews, and he was reasonably well liked and well known. And aside from when sometimes he would bar with Khan with me, etc., because Khan was the more famous, popular player. So aside from that, he was actually pretty well liked, etc. So this idea that he hates CSGO, that doesn't wash with me whatsoever. He doesn't hate CSGO. In fact, he likes it as a scene, and even as a game, I think he thinks it's all right, and it's gotten better over the years, much as I think the same thing. But it's not 1.6. It's not as wonderful and captivating as that, just as a game. And the scene has only just gotten to the level, say, in the last 6 to 9 months, where it's at the level of 1.6 for what was cool for us. Massive international tournaments all the time, proper prize money on the line, majors that people are going hell for leather for, that you can't just be like, they don't care about that tournament. They definitely do about these huge tournaments and facing their rivals. Now it's got to the level where, again, he can get energized and into the scene in this sense. Unfortunately, he hasn't been on some of these analysis desks and doing casting, so we haven't been able to see it in that sense. But what is he like as an analyst and caster in that sense? Well, first of all, because of being a more mature person and all these different experiences of being a pro and getting to see from the inside and seeing the way people would say things in interviews that they themselves didn't believe within their team, or they'd say things to try and create propaganda. This is one of the things we always used to get mad at Khan at. He would kind of create these propaganda agendas within his team of like, we're better than that team. Well, why are you? They've won all the tournaments, you've won hardly any of them. No, but we've got a winning record of them. Like spurious logic like that. He's always, much like when we would discuss it, this is one of the things we bonded over. He's always been against that kind of like bullshit and like artificial hype. And so that's come into his casting. And just because of who he is and the way he articulates himself, maybe he doesn't always come off that well when he tries to explain this. Like, maybe there's a way to explain that point where someone would just go like, yeah, I see your point there, but they wouldn't be as offended by it. He can be a bit blunt in that sense. And I recognise that myself, because it's an issue I've had in my own life and in my own career, is that sense. And it isn't always possible to attune it and kind of like assuage people from being mad at it, because there's a degree to which if you're going to say those things, someone's going to be mad anyway. Now, the thing is, lurppis' attitude in general is kind of like, well, I don't give a fuck if you're mad. Therefore, sometimes even when he can see that there might be a different way to do it, he's like, well, I don't care anyway. And also, because now he doesn't rely on CS for his career and his income, and he doesn't have to be here in 5 years. He can watch it if he wants at home. He can do some events. He can do some writing on HTV.org. He feels even less like he has to kind of like bow to people's demands or present himself in a certain way, because he's got other things in his life. CS is a hobby very much for him, and doesn't have to be that involved with it. Now, as a caster, I actually think he's one of the best, because he's one of the only ones who, like I said, has the mind of an analyst, but was a pro player, knows the majority of, at least half of the top players, and now from CSGO knows most of the other ones. He basically has it all, and has some journalistic experience. He has it all wrapped up into one. So as a caster, and particularly as an analyst desk, I think on analysis desks, we had like a really good synergy going, despite what people might think about how we were like barbing. Oh man, I bet they hate each other. Despite all that, I think he's one of the few people who's very well suited in that sense. And I think if CSGO as an esport wants to go places and be respected as a really good esport that has great analysis, think of some of those other games that are fucking complete shitters doing analysis and commentary, where even fans are just like, God, why does this guy get to be involved? We have a chance here to have some really awesome people involved that were there from the beginning and can be here now presenting it to the biggest audience, and we can have the biggest tournaments, biggest wide scale appeal, yet we can also have something for the hardcore, and we can layer it, and we can introduce people to what's brilliant about the game and articulate what's special about this and why this is a great player, because we know from years before, and we know what these players are like, and we know all this stuff that new people can't know, unfortunately. And no matter how great their intentions are, and if they work very hard, maybe they can get close to that level, but there's always going to be something where if the old school guy sticks in that sense, he'll have a little one up there. And that's why I think lurppis is still a valuable member of the community and still a valuable force within it. But if you see kind of the way his career went and some of the different idiosyncrasies of his personality, how it developed over the years, and some of the things that happened to him, I wonder, maybe it informs you more, it paints some of the background details into the picture, and you kind of get more of a sense of who lurppis is.